Hi, welcome to another edition of the Alan Rosenberg Show. Today I'm going to be doing a video that was suggested by one of our viewers named Jason, and he came up with the concept, third time is the charm. It was a while back, Jason, so thanks so much. And the idea was great third albums. The problem was there's just so many. In fact, yesterday I did a little brainstorming, took a piece of paper, and literally was writing down in my brain, third albums that I could think of. And then I went down to my archives and looked at the CDs, and I'm like, man, there's just so many great third albums. I think I got over 60 on this list. So I want a manageable video. So I fine-tailored it a little bit, which I think is actually more interesting. And these are going to be great third albums that were also breakthrough albums for the artist. So not just great third albums, these were the albums that really were breakthroughs for these artists on their third album. So I got 25 of them here, plus like another 9 that are interesting that I just feel like mentioning. So without further ado, let's do it. Thanks again, Jason. These are not in any particular order, and I'm doing that purposely. Makes it fun for me. I'm literally picking them out at random, the ones that I chose, and keeps you on your toes. You can't figure it out. It's not in alphabetical order or anything. So let's start with the one vinyl one, and that's this one. If you know my channel, I'm a huge fan of what I call classic era Genesis, and really it starts with this album. This is Nursery Crime, which was their third album, of course. This is the first pressing. I've shown this before because I was into Genesis from the very beginning. But their first album, of course, was From Genesis to Revelations, which was when they were students, really. And then you got Trespass, which is a fine record, but this one, Nursery Crime, is really the beginning of the original Genesis, the classic Genesis with Phil Collins and Steve Hackett. And this thing is light years ahead of, Trespass and certainly From Genesis to Revelation. So there's the first one, Genesis, Nursery Crime, classic third album that certainly was a breakthrough for that band. The first one I thought of when I was just brainstorming and writing them down on a piece of paper was pretty obvious, and that's this one, Bruce Springsteen, Born to Run. What can you say? It doesn't get much more classic as far as third albums go than this. Front cover of Time and Newsweek sold millions of copies, and to this day, I think when a lot of people think of Bruce Springsteen, they are thinking of Born to Run. So, and if you like Bruce Springsteen and you like Born to Run, oh, here it is, right there. I'm using it. There's a great box set of Born to Run with a whole bunch of movie. There's a documentary movie on it, Wings for Wheels, and live stuff. This is a fine box set. Born to Run, another one. Another one I thought of, and this one is the only live album on there, but pretty obvious in a way. The Allman Brothers Band, live at the Fillmore East, one of the great live albums of all time, and certainly was their breakthrough album, following the self-titled debut in Idle Wild South, which are amazing records, but they didn't sell squat back in the day. And this is the album that broke open the Allman Brothers. So Fillmore East, for sure, would be there as well. So let's make a little room. Let's keep going again in no particular order. This is one that I thought of right away as well. And I remember going to the record store with my best friend Mike and a friend Mark. Titus Oaks on Long Island. I can remember to this day to pick this album up when it came out. Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers' third album. A lot of people say it's his best, and I would not argue that. It's way up there. This is Damn the Torpedoes. Now, of course, his debut album had 2 big hits with American Girl and Breakdown. The second album, You're gonna Get It, was also fairly successful, but none of them were on a par. This thing just blew the doors open. This was a real, true breakthrough for Tom Petty. Damn the Torpedoes, a classic third album that was a breakthrough. Let's keep going. I thought of this one, Van Morrison, his classic third album, Moondance. I still think it's song for song, pound for pound, his strongest album. I know people are going to talk about Astro Weeks, the one that came before that, but Astro Weeks, honestly, in my opinion, is not even in the same league as this one. I mean, this is the title track, and it's Stone Me, Crazy Love, and Caravan, Into the Mystic, Come Running, These Dreams of You, Everyone. Glad this is a greatest hits album, for God's sakes, but it's not. Moondance, the third album from Van the Man. Great one. There's a cool one. This is the album that got me into Marillion. Fish lead singer Misplaced Childhood was their third album. And I remember hearing on broadcast radio in the United States, pretty rare, but they were playing Kaylee, the single. And I was like, what the hell is that? That is just an incredible song. Catchy, just wonderful. And of course, that was the initial hit single from Misplaced Childhood, a classic third album from Marillion, right there. Let's keep going. I am not the biggest fan of theirs, but, at that time they were pretty popular, no doubt. And it is no doubt. Their third album, Tragic Kingdom. A huge record. Of course, Gwen Stefani went on to a lot of other things, but this is a fun album that I haven't listened to probably since it came out. But there's just a girl. There's so many great tracks on this album for sure. Sunday Morning. Tragic Kingdom, a classic, no doubt album, which was their third album. That's a good choice too. Let's keep going. This was the breakthrough album for me. My sister had this album, and I fell in love with it. This is Traffic, and their third album, John Barleycorn Must Die. I think it's by far their best album. I like it better than Low Spark of High Heel Boys and any of their other albums. Just a phenomenal record, and that is it. Glad, Freedom Rider, Empty Pages, another album that's like every song is classic. John Barleycorn Must Die from Traffic, classic third album for sure. I'm a huge Wishbone Ash fan. Well, it doesn't really get any better for Wishbone Ash than their third album, Argus. Right there. That is song for song, pound for pound, their best album, certainly their most famous album, a 5-star record across the seas. And if you don't know Wishbone Ash, this is a great place to start. Get this version, the expanded edition, remastered and revisited, which sounds better than the original. Argus from Wishbone Ash, another classic third album that was a breakthrough. Went out to dinner with my friend Mark last night, and he had an interesting story. I was telling him the concept of this video, and he said, what are the ones you're thinking of? And I said, one of them was this one, and this is the classic 1974 album from Bachman Turner Overdrive, Not Fragile. I was 11 years old, as was Mark. This album was revolutionary in its time. Everybody of our age just loved this album. It was huge. You Ain't Seen Nothing Yet, Rolling Down the Highway. But this album just crunches. There's jazzy stuff on it. And my friend Mark, who was 11 when the album came out, was learning how to play guitar. And he told me that he learned how to play guitar with the title track, Not Fragile. Cool story he told me last night. The riff is da-na-na-na-na-na-na, da-na-na-na-na-na-na-na. He was learning how to play guitar. It's like bar chords. And he could just do that riff. And great album, by the way. It still holds up. This album and BTO2 is great stuff. All right, let's keep going. I always talk about The Who. I'm a huge Who fan, and their third album to me is really special. I got all the mega box sets, but I always loved The Who Sell Out. So for me, this is a breakthrough album. Obviously, they broke through with My Generation and the first album. The second album, a quick one, Happy Jack, is kind of a mixed bag. This album, to me, is stupendous. This is still one of my favorite albums of all time, and certainly one of my favorite Who albums. And I am sticking to Who Sell Out there because that's their third album. And for me, that's a breakthrough album. As is this one. This was the first Neil Young album I ever grew up listening to. This and then later on, Decade. And his third album is After the Gold Rush. I don't think Neil's ever done better than this album. And this is just a classic album. And it was his third. So let's put Neil Young and After the Gold Rush in there as well. Let's talk about some more modern times, although it's really, really old at this point. But does it get any bigger as far as breakthrough albums than Alanis Morissette's Jagged Little Pill? And that was her third album. So, she took control of her destiny, her career. And what can you say? This one album has made Alanis Morissette, to a certain extent, a legendary artist, Broadway show. And this is just a perfect album. It really is a massive classic. And it was Alanis Morissette's third album, as should definitely be included. I mean, talk about a breakthrough, right? As was this one. Yes, big fan of that classic Yes. It all really starts with their third album, the Yes album. This is the one where they got Steve Howe in the band and just changed the band completely. They would later on, of course, get Rick Wakeman. But Yours Is No Disgrace, Clap, Starship Trooper, Seen All Good People, Adventure, Perpetual Change. I mean, my God. And this was a breakthrough album. You know, I liked their first album. I even liked their second album to a certain extent, Time of the Word. But this album, that's a breakthrough. It's night and day compared to the other albums. Let's keep going. How about American Rock and Roll with Aerosmith? Their third album, I believe to this day, well, maybe that's not the case anymore, but it was always their largest selling record. You know, maybe with Pump and those later ones maybe have gone past it at this point. But this is their third album, Toys in the Attic. And certainly remember when they came out with that, the title track, and Up the Salty, and Walk This Way, big 10-inch record, Sweet Emotion, No More, No More, Round and Round, You See Me Crying. This is a classic Aerosmith album, and it was their third album. And yeah, this was a breakthrough after their self-titled debut and Get Your Wings. This is the massive beginning of classic Aerosmith. And for me, it doesn't get much more classic than this album, the third album from The Clash. Honestly, this is how I got into The Clash. London Calling. Here in America, their first album didn't even get released. It was just an import. And I always liked their second album as well, but this album is the one that really got me into them. London Calling, originally on double vinyl. The hidden track, of course, was Train in Vain. Wasn't even listed. That was one of the first songs I ever heard from them. And then they would play on the radio the title track and Lost in the Supermarket. And this is just one of my all-time favorite albums to this day. The Clash and London Calling, a breakthrough third record for sure. Speaking of Brit pop, which we weren't, here's Blur. And this was the breakthrough album for me. Here's the album that really turned me on to Blur. And it was their third record, Park Life. I just love this album. This is a great one, To the End. And title track, you can't help but not smile when you listen to the title track of Park Life. And there's just a lot of really good songs. This Is a Low is another one. To the End, did I mention that? End of a Century. Really good record from Blur. Park Life, a breakthrough album, at least for me, here in the States with Blur. I am not a huge fan of this band. In fact, this is the only studio album I have from them, and I never listened to it. I do have a greatest hits that I never listened to as well. But if you're talking about breakthrough third albums, you gotta mention this one, and I do own it. And that's Bon Jovi's Slippery When Wet. I mean, does it get much bigger than this as far as third albums? And obviously, this was their breakthrough. So that's a perfect choice. Bon Jovi, Slippery When Wet. And let's keep going. One of my favorite bands. I always have such a sweet spot for them, everything they've ever done. But it all really started with this one, Parallel Lines from Blondie. This is a deluxe edition. But I used to play in a band and drums. Played the drums in a band. We used to cover a lot of Blondie tracks and a lot of tracks from this album. Hanging on the Telephone, One Way or Another, Fade Away and Radiate, Picture This, Pretty Baby, Sunday Girl. I think we used to play almost this whole album. And Clem Burks was such a great drummer as well. But Parallel Lines, the third record from Blondie, and certainly their breakthrough with Heart of Glass from that album. Let's keep going. Def Leppard. Talk about breakthroughs. Holy mackerel. Pyromania. Here's a deluxe edition. Their third record. I mean, Rock Till You Drop, Photograph, Too Late for Love, Foolin', Rock of Ages. Talk about breakthrough albums, right? I don't know how many billions of copies this thing has sold over the decades, but there you have it. Pyromania from Def Leppard. Here's the breakthrough for this band here in America anyway, certainly for me. The White Stripes and the album White Blood Cells. This was a huge album, obviously, in its time, and I dug it just pretty much like everybody else did. Really a very unique sound, and this album still holds up really well. This one and Elephant, the one that came after it. But White Blood Cells was their third album, and certainly the breakthrough album here for the White Stripes. No doubt about it. It's an interesting choice. But Rod Stewart with the Faces, when he had the Faces and solo career, he really, really, really took off with his third solo record. Every Picture Tells a Story. I mean, this is a classic solo record. And yep, it was his third one. Maggie May, Mandolin Wind, and I Know I'm Losing You, A Reason to Believe, the title track. Every Picture Tells a Story. Third record from Rod Stewart, and really his huge breakthrough as a solo artist. Gasoline Alley was the one before that, but that's the album that really took him off. This was the one that I lived in. I actually saw them on this tour. I remember the first U2 album, Boy, and got some radio play. But this is the album that they really started really making a name for themselves here in the States. War, their third record, Sunday Bloody Sunday, was always getting airplay, and New Year's Day, and Two Hearts Beat as One. And I saw them live on this tour, and they were pretty amazing. You just knew that they were bound for more than just being a great band, but to be something super special, and they sure did. Here's an interesting choice. Supertramp. This was the first album that I knew by Supertramp, their third record, and this is a tremendous progressive rock album to this day. Crime of the Century, great cover too. But look at, School, Bloody Well Right, that was the one that got played all the time, Asylum, Dreamer, and the title track, Crime of the Century. This is a great album, and the breakthrough for Supertramp, for sure, and it was their third record. And I'm going to show you one more of my 25 selections of the real big breakthrough albums for me on their third record. This is one that some might not agree with, but I'm a big fan of Patti Smith. I have everything she's ever done. But everybody talks about Horses, 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 and I guess it was obviously a revolutionary album when it came out in 75, I guess it was. And I always liked it. But for me, the first album I got from Patti Smith, probably like most people, was her third record, Easter. And I got this when it came out, and I just thought this album was incredible. And honestly, I think it's far and away her best album. And yeah, that includes Easter. I mean, this album is perfection from beginning to end. And of course, Because Tonight, the big hit, and Privilege, and We Three, and Till Victory, and Space Monkey, and another song that you can't mention on the air anymore. But tremendous record. Horses is a great album too, but it's just not quite as tight as Easter. So Easter from Patti Smith would be my next choice for in this category of albums that fit this category. Great third albums that were breakthroughs for their artists. Here's the 25 I chose. A couple more minutes. I'm going to show you some that I didn't choose, but these are great third albums as well. Just didn't have the impact for me, but you may be thinking of them for yourself, so I want to mention them. We're talking about Elton John and Tumbleweed Connection. Classic third album for sure. And, obviously a huge hit. And probably a bunch of you out there are saying, what about Elton John, Tumbleweed Connection? So there it is. Some of you are probably saying the same thing about David Bowie's third album, Light Years ahead of his first two. The Man Who Sold the World, great album, an album that I've grown to love, but it didn't have the same impact as any of these for me. So it's kind of in this secondary list. Same with this one, Alice Cooper, Love It to Death, his classic. They were a band at the time. Their classic third record. This is the one, of course, that's got I'm 18 and Ballad of Dwight Fry. Kind of a mixed bag of an album for me, but no doubt that was a huge Alice Cooper album. Let's keep going. Here's another one. Didn't change my life, but it certainly was a huge record for that band. It's the only album I have by them, and that's The Verb and Urban Hymns. And I picked it up because of Bittersweet Symphony. The Drugs Don't Work is great also. It's a really good record for sure. And that was their third album and certainly would be their breakthrough album. Probably a lot of people would say that about ZZ Top, their third record, Tres Hombres. Another great album. These remastered ones with bonus tracks I really dig as well. Jesus Just Left Chicago, Waiting for the Bus. You know this album. And it's a great, great album. Didn't quite have the impact for me as some of these other ones, but there it is. And I'm going to mention Love, their third record, Forever Changes, I think far and away their best album ever. And this is a great album. This was their third record as well. I certainly mentioned that album. What else would I mention to you? I'm going to mention a couple that don't really fit this category, but you're probably thinking about them. You know, Led Zeppelin 3 is a very different Led Zeppelin album at that time. It had, you know, a lot of acoustic stuff on it, so it was a very different album than their first one and the Led Zeppelin 2 album, which bludgeoned you. So Zeppelin 3 is a great third album, but it certainly wasn't a breakthrough album because they broke through right away with their first album. So it doesn't fit the category, but I thought I'd mention it. Same with this one. Dire Straits' third album, I think, is a masterpiece, making movies. Probably my go-to studio album by them. Especially the first side is amazing. But to me, their breakthrough was their debut album, so it doesn't really fit the category. But I figured I'd mention it because it is such a great record. And when it comes to great third albums, making movies would be there. Although, again, it really wasn't their breakthrough. What else would I mention? I got one more, and because it's kind of unique. The Pretenders, I'm a huge fan of them. I think their debut album is one of the greatest albums of all time. Certainly one of the greatest debut albums of all time, but one of the greatest albums of all time. And I was a fan from the get-go. I saw the original Pretenders multiple times. So this was their breakthrough album, and it's still their best album. But then they had the tragedy of the members dying, Pete Fondon and James Honeyman Scott, and they did their second album, and a lot of people didn't think their second album was nearly as good as the first record. I thought it was pretty great, but what were they going to do for their third album without the two original members? And they really came back really strong with Learning to Crawl. This was a huge album and tons of hits, and it's a great album. Back on the Chain Gang and Middle of the Road and My City Was Gone, Thin Line Between Love and Hate, I Hurt You, 2,000 Miles, you get the idea. So this was not a breakthrough. Their debut was a breakthrough, but they were able to come back as the Pretenders and really still have massive success. And so I wanted to mention Learning to Crawl. So there you have it, guys. Hope you enjoyed this video. Kind of an interesting topic. Thanks, Jason, again. Great third albums, will breakthrough albums for the band. Third time is a charm indeed. So let me know what you think. If you think I missed some, they're probably on this list over here. But again, I was limiting it down to breakthrough albums. Pretty much, anyway. As always, thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate it. If you're new to my channel, hit subscribe. Check out my other videos. I got playlists all over there and good content. I hope you will agree. As always, thanks so much. Hope you have a good day today. And I'll see you next time on the Alan Rosenberg Show.